Welcome to another Montana motorcycling adventure, brought to you by All Moto Tire, Northwest Montana's best source for your motorcycle tire needs. Ever since hearing about the infamous Beartooth Pass and seeing video of this 11,000-foot summit, it has been on my bucket list of motorcycle rides. Contacting a few of my motorcycling friends, I began the planning for what would become a 5-day odyssey to fulfill that bucket list dream. I began exploring the map for routes that would cover both paved and dirt tracks, looking for routes that, while might be familiar to some of my riding buddies, would be a totally new experience for me. Of the well over half dozen folks that I had invited, the troop was whittled down to 4 riders: John, Bill, Dan, and myself. So welcome aboard as we retrace this epic journey. We'll cover some of the best roads that Montana and Wyoming have to offer. Of course, what would an adventure be without a little drama beforehand? A couple of weeks before the trip, I'd set off on a day trip with my friend Rob, with our intent to traverse Thompson Pass, Montana, and to Wallace, Idaho for a little lunch. It was late summer and a gorgeous day, but a storm was to arrive in the Flathead that afternoon. Observing the weather radar at a stop along the route, we could see that the storm could easily catch us out and make for a very wet and windy ride. That being the case, we opted for a foreshortened ride, choosing to head south through Charlo, past the Buffalo Reserve, onto Nine Pipe, and then back to the Flathead. The ride went smoothly. Rob and I had a great time. We parted ways near his home in Rollins, and I continued north. Reaching Summers, I peeled off the main highway and made my way through the back roads leading to Highway 82 and home. That's where the smooth journey was about to sputter. Entering a residential area, my 2023 KTM 1290 coughed and died, leaving me rather perplexed. With some effort, I was able to restart the bike and proceeded to the highway where it died yet again. With a reluctant restart, I made it another few hundred yards or so down a rather busy highway when the beast finally died, displaying a big red fuel pump error on the dash. Thank goodness for friendly neighbors. Once again, neighbor Dennis was coming to my rescue, bringing my enclosed trailer to haul me home. With only 14 months of ownership and but 2,700 miles on the odometer, a failed fuel pump was the last thing I expected. It was a little over a week before our 5-day ride was to launch. Thus began the scramble to repair the machine. I decided to order up an aftermarket quantum fuel pump for the 2023, similar to the one I'd purchased for the 2015 1290, but never installed. The process of rebuilding the older pump, while tedious, was easy to do. The entire assembly is held together with screws, and the rebuild kit came with all but 2 of the O-rings necessary for a successful repair. These 2 O-rings, however, were the ones that seal the assembly to the bottom of the fuel tank, and for all intents and purposes were unobtainium from the local dealer, or any other dealer within 500 miles for that matter. Then it was yet another scramble to determine the sizes of the 2 O-rings and procure them from an industrial source, which I was able to do. And by the way, the minimum price for these two 65 and 60 millimeter units from a motorcycle oriented retail outlet is well over $50. Attention pre-2022 KTM 1290 owners. These are Viton fuel-resistant units from Motion Industries that sell for just over $5 a piece. With so little time left to get at least one of the 1290s up and running, I placed orders from 3 different sources, even including the $50 plus units. Having received the new Quantum aftermarket pump for the 2023, I concentrated on removing the pump body from the tank. As it turns out, the newer model pump is a plastic-bodied affair, requiring separation of the 2 plastic halves that snap together. The KTM service manual states that the housing is ruined in this step, and their solution is to provide a rebuild kit that includes new pump body halves. However, well, folks, it's been a rough one. I managed to get the plastic cases apart and rebuild the old one, and it did not work. So now we have a brand new $400 KTM pump that we are going to install, and we're crossing our fingers that this actually solves the problem. We shall see. Well, lo and behold, I don't know if you can hear that, but she runs. Yes, little wonders never cease. Finally, some good fortune in an otherwise dismal week of uncertainty. By the end of the week, the O-rings for the 2015 had arrived. And that, my friends, is the sound of a successful fuel pump rebuild on the 2015, and I am so happy. Now it was a matter of choice. Which bike should I take? Not having a GPS mount on the 2015, I began loading up the 23 for our journey. Monday morning, Dan and I would meet up in Big Fork. Our first day destination, Dillon, Montana. Under overcast skies, we passed down the east side of Flathead Lake.
Pretty darn smoky. We're going to be breathing this for 2 days, probably. Not
It was early September, so fire season was still on.
fire.
It would be a while until we'd breathe cleaner air. Then it was on to Missoula via Highway 93 and Interstate 90. We generally avoid major freeways, but we were on a schedule to hook up with the rest of our riding group. John and K-Bill were right on time. With a quick fill up and sorting out Dan's lack of GPS charging, we had a few more miles of super slab to cover before turning south on Rock Creek Road, a much more interesting section of the ride. It was time to head east for that last little bit of freeway before turning south on Rock Creek Road. Being back on a nice rural two-lane was a welcome change, with the road eventually turning to gravel. Everybody doing okay?
Yeah.
How in the world does that road stay so smooth?
They just graded it.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, you can see where they've been pushing stuff off to the side. Did you see the sign for the microburst?
no. Dan was referring to a weather phenomenon where a cold column of air rapidly descends upon the landscape. These microbursts are generally said to cover not more than an area of 2.5 miles, but can have devastating effects on trees, vegetation, and structures. They can be wet or dry bursts of air. In 1989, there was such an occurrence in Rock Creek Canyon when hundreds of trees were ripped down by the violent winds. There is a viewing area where visitors can catch a glimpse of this powerful force of nature. A short distance south of the microburst site lie the Hogback Cabin and the Morgan Case Home. In 1979, the Lolo National Forest acquired 360 acres upon which these two old homesteads were built. At that time, those in decision-making authority wanted to reclaim the land to its natural state and wanted to tear down the old building. But an evaluation for the National Register of Historic Places needed to be completed. The buildings were not removed but allowed to remain on site with the idea they would slowly rot away. 10 years later, a new administration took the decision to restore Hogback Homestead and the Morgan Homestead. The Morgan Case home can now be rented for $75 per night. The history books are filled with conflicting information, but it was said that Agnes Annie Morgan, born a black slave in 1833, made her way west sometime after the Civil War, having learned early on how to cook. It was also said that she prepared food for General Custer and his army. Annie migrated to the Phillipsburg area, eventually being granted a 160-acre homestead, where she lived a self-sustaining life until her death in 1914. Annie was a remarkable woman. You can learn more about Annie on the Montana Cowboy Hall of Fame website. Continuing on southward, the road was a joy to ride. The landscape opened up a bit, revealing still green farmlands, but the skies remained smoky. Then it was back on the pavement. Stopping in Phillipsburg for fuel and a bit of takeaway, we made our way to a nearby park for a lunch break. As it turns out, this is apparently a favorite stopping point for the Montana BMW Riders Club, of which my three riding compatriots are members of. Known as the Pintler Veterans Memorial Scenic Highway, Phillipsburg sits along a 64-mile drive between Georgetown Lake and Drummond, Montana, about halfway between Glacier National Park and Yellowstone. A century ago, Phillipsburg was established as a mining town, but eventually investors and big money moved on, leaving the town in somewhat of a depression. Today, however, it is still the largest source of sapphires in Montana, and in recent times, Phillipsburg has been revitalized as a tourist destination, with eateries, shops, and remodeled accommodations. With many year-round activities in and nearby Phillipsburg, it seems like a great mini vacation destination. Leaving the park, I managed to get turned around, heading north instead of south. Dan was on duty, however, and got me pointed back in the correct direction. We had more great two lanes to cover before reaching our accommodations in Dillon. A few miles outside of Anaconda, we pointed the bike south on 569, a nice two-lane with some sweeping curves. Well, just like Alaska or northern BC, you get to wait for a pilot car. Our fun was briefly interrupted by some road work and waiting for a pilot car. But sometimes a short break is a good thing. Given the minor work being performed, such a major piloting effort seemed unnecessary. Oh well, as they say, safety first. And we were back at it.
Free range cattle.
Like many other regions of Montana, this was cattle country, free range cattle country. Best to be on the lookout and cover those brake controls. Arriving in Dillon, Dan discovered an issue on the Tenere 700. The battery terminal had cracked, and he needed a replacement battery. Beaverhead Motorsports saved the day. With about 13 minutes to spare before they closed, I rolled up on the KTM to retrieve the new battery. Once installed with a few washers to make up for the bolts that were too long, the Yamaha was back in business. Time to rustle up some grub. With a mere 7/10 of a mile walk, we filed into a rather eclectic Mexican restaurant, Los Corritas. And this wouldn't be the last of the south of the border fare we'd sample. This style of dining seemed to be a theme throughout the trip. Tomorrow would be a big day, about 300 miles of mixed pavement and gravel. Yet to come, the Big Daddy, said to be one of the most, if not the most scenic roads in America, Beartooth Pass. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up and please consider subscribing to our channel.